In about 2012, we were approached by one of the biosimilar manufacturers to do a phase 3 study with their medication. And we've now done a number of phase 3 trials with biosimilars. So the way in which I've had exposure to the biosimilars has been in a clinical trial situation. And so that's a double-blinded scenario where we don't actually know whether the patients are receiving the reference medication or the biosimilar medication. And at the end of the day, we saw response rates of around about 50-60% in both groups that seem similar. Now, what we don't know is whether you can take a patient on the reference biologic and switch them to the biosimilar and they will achieve the same result. So we don't actually know on an individual patient whether they're going to achieve the same result when they switch from one to the other. So we don't know about the interchangeability, but we know in a patient cohort, in a patient grouping, that you'd expect a similar proportion of patients to respond to the biosimilar as would to the reference biologic medication. So the treatment program to get a new biologic to market can cost anywhere between $500 million and $2 billion. And it will involve testing of usually anywhere between about 2,000 and 5,000 patients. Now, to do a biosimilar series of clinical trials, that process is greatly truncated. So you would still need to do phase 1 clinical trials to show that the molecule works and that it is safe to use in humans. And that's normally a smallish trial of around about 30 to 60 patients. And then once that's done, then you need to do a phase 3 trial, just a single phase 3 trial, powered for non-inferiority, and that would usually require around about 200 to 300 participants. And so the cost of bringing a biosimilar to market would be probably less than $300 to $400 million. So nothing like the $2 billion that may be required to bring a new biologic to market, but still not insignificant. And the quality and the rigor of the testing still has to hit the benchmarks required by the TGA. For registration. I think we have the same concern with all biologics, that there will be some side effect that we weren't aware of previously that suddenly becomes apparent after prolonged usage. And I think what we're finding is that each year that goes by, we're getting a higher level of comfort with the use of these agents because these side effects are not emerging. Now, the other thing that's giving us comfort is that as these new biologics were introduced, registries were also introduced. And so the monitoring for side effects with these class of agents is much greater than the monitoring of side effects with any other medication. So we have a very high level of scrutiny going on. There's a lot of post-marketing monitoring going on. There's disease registries with pretty much the use of all of these agents. And so no one will give you a guarantee forever. But as each year goes by and these side effects are not emerging, then I think we're feeling more and more confident. How do we describe a biosimilar to a patient? Well, biosimilars are biological medications that target the same molecule as the reference medication and should have similar effect and side effects as the reference medication. However, you can't always be certain because these are not simple tablets where you can actually manufacture a generic in the laboratory and it will be absolutely equivalent. These are biologically made antibodies, and so they're usually made in large vats using various fungi or bacteria to actually manufacture the organism. And so there's often a little bit of biological difference. So what they look for when they manufacture a biosimilar is that it's targeting the same molecule and that it's achieving similar binding to that molecule and similar effect to the parent molecule. How the doctor presents those options to the patients are going to be really important, and I think the doctor needs to be fully cognizant of what they're actually asking of the patient to do, what they're expecting in the outcome. And I think you'll find that many patients will be quite receptive to the idea because they realise that they're actually on a good wicket. They're actually getting really 21st century treatments, highly effective treatments for a disease that otherwise was largely untreatable. And they're getting a great response. And I think if patients have the option of switching back if it's not achieving their response rate. That'll probably give them some comfort as well. If they don't have the option, then I think it's really going to be a case of try it, see how you go. And I think it would be reasonable to expect that the biosimilars are going to be achieving the same sort of response rates with the same levels of safety. This is really an interesting question, is where will we be in 10 years' time? Now, what's been happening in psoriasis is that every 2 or 3 years, a new biologic agent is coming out that is substantially better than the ones that have been beforehand. And they tend to be better in terms of the proportion of patients who will achieve a satisfactory response in their psoriasis. And so, for example, when etanercept first came out, about 30% of patients were achieving a 75% improvement in their psoriasis. Now with the third and fourth generation biologics, about 90% of patients are achieving a 90% improvement in their response. And the benchmark for what's a satisfactory response has shifted from a 75% improvement to a 90% improvement, now to a 100% improvement. And now what patients and doctors are striving for is complete clearance of the disease. And so as these new agents become available, then I think people will tend to prescribe the newer agents. But what we're going to see over the next few years is that these third and fourth generation biologics are going to reach the end of their patent life, and we'll start to see biosimilars for these highly effective medications. And once that comes in, then we're going to start seeing price pressure on the manufacturers of the original biologic agent to reduce their price, and we'll also see biosimilars coming in at a lower price. And what that's going to mean is that patients with psoriasis will still be able to achieve that superb clinical response with that very high requirement for safety, but we're also going to be able to start treating people with other dermatological diseases, things like atopic dermatitis, pemphigus vulgaris, alopecia areata, and perhaps even vitiligo, urticaria, systemic lupus. There's a whole range of biologics under development. There's a whole lot of diseases for which there haven't really been satisfactory treatments. And think back prior to 2000, how we managed psoriasis then compared to how we manage psoriasis now. We're still very much in the dark ages in many of these other dermatological diseases. The innovation is coming through, these treatments are coming through. We need to actually create some space in the PBS budget so that we can start to embrace the technology so that our eczema patients can start to look forward to the same sort of benefits as our psoriasis patients have been achieving over the last 18 to 20 years. The key thing is for dermatologists not to be frightened of them, to have an expectation that they should be achieving similar results, to expect that there will be some patient-to-patient variation, but there's always the opportunity to swap people back. I think one of the things that will be interesting is that when we see tachyphylaxis in patients who've been on biologics for a long time, sometimes that's due to the development of antibodies, particularly with the non-fully humanised biologic molecules. And if you change to a biosimilar, then I would imagine that the immunity against the biosimilar may be different, and you may actually start to unwind some of that tachyphylaxis. So that'll be an interesting observation to look out for. I think the key thing is when these become available, there will be incentives that the government puts in place, usually administrative incentives for you, to make it a little bit easier to prescribe. I think the key thing is don't be frightened of it, give it a go, see how you go, and if it's not meeting your expectations, then you do have the opportunity to switch patients back again without any detriment to their treatment.